The train was disappearing into the distance when my 7-year-old granddaughter Sarah grabbed my hand with surprising strength and whispered the words that would shatter my world forever. "Grandma, we need to leave. Now. He's not coming back, and we can't stay here." I looked down at her pale face, her usual bright smile replaced by an expression far too serious for a child. "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" I asked, watching the last car of my son Michael's train vanish around the bend. "Daddy will be back from his business trip in 3 days." But Sarah's eyes weren't following the train. They were fixed on something behind us, scanning the small crowd of people still lingering on the platform. "He told me to tell you if the scary men came," she whispered, tugging insistently at my coat. "We have to go to the car right now, Grandma. Please." Can you imagine being told by your own granddaughter that your son, your reliable, methodical son, who never caused a moment of worry, might never return? What would you do if a 7-year-old child suddenly became your only source of truth in a world that had just stopped making sense? I had spent 68 years trusting in predictable routines, in the safety of ordinary days. Michael caught the 8:15 train to the city every Tuesday for client meetings. Sarah spent those days with me, coloring at my kitchen table and helping me tend the garden. This was supposed to be just another Tuesday, but as I followed Sarah's frightened gaze, I spotted them. 2 men in dark coats standing near the station entrance, their attention clearly focused on us. Nothing about their appearance was overtly threatening, yet something in their posture, the way they communicated without speaking, sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the October morning air. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 68, I thought my days of adventure were limited to mystery novels and cooking shows. I had been a high school principal for 35 years, a profession that taught me to read people quickly and trust my instincts about trouble. But nothing in my experience had prepared me for the moment when my granddaughter became my protector. "All right, darling," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm while my heart raced. "Let's go to the car." I took her small hand in mine, and together we walked toward the parking lot with measured steps. Not too fast to draw attention, but with clear purpose. Sarah stayed close to my side, clutching the small backpack she always brought to my house. "Grandma," she whispered as we reached my sedan, "Daddy said I should give you Mr. Whiskers if the bad men came. He has something special inside." Mr. Whiskers was her beloved stuffed cat, worn gray from years of love and countless adventures. As I helped her into the car, she handed me the familiar toy, and I immediately felt something unusual sewn into its belly. A hard, rectangular object that definitely hadn't been there when I'd last helped her wash it. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking space, glancing in my rearview mirror. One of the men from the platform was walking quickly toward a black sedan parked 3 rows behind us. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as 20 years of reading teenage behavior kicked in. When someone is trying not to be noticed, they usually are up to something they shouldn't be doing. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice gentle while checking the mirrors constantly. "Did Daddy tell you anything else? Anything about why those men might be looking for us?" She nodded solemnly, her small face reflecting a maturity that broke my heart. "He said his work discovered some bad people doing bad things, and the bad people found out he knew." She paused, then added in an even smaller voice, "He said they might try to hurt us, to make him stay quiet." The simple explanation hit me like a physical blow. My son, my careful, honest son, who worked in corporate security consulting, had apparently stumbled onto something dangerous enough to turn his mother and daughter into targets. I made a quick decision to avoid our usual route home, instead turning toward the downtown area where I could lose any followers in the maze of city streets. As I navigated through traffic, Sarah's words echoed in my mind. The bad people found out he knew. What had Michael discovered? And more importantly, what was hidden inside Mr. Whiskers that was worth threatening a child to obtain? The black sedan remained several cars behind us, too consistent to be coincidence. I made a series of random turns, my principal's instincts kicking in as I mentally cataloged escape routes and safe places we could go. When the sedan matched every turn, maintaining its distance but never losing us, I knew with absolute certainty that our lives had just become very dangerous indeed. "Are we going to be okay, Grandma?" Sarah asked, her voice small but steady. I met her eyes in the rearview mirror, struck by how much she resembled Michael at that age when facing difficult truths. "We're going to be very brave, sweetheart," I promised, "and we're going to help your daddy by keeping his secret safe." What I didn't tell her was that I had no idea how we were going to survive whatever storm was coming. But one thing I knew for certain as I watched those ominous headlights follow us through the city: whoever was hunting us had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated what a grandmother would do to protect her family, and that mistake was going to cost them dearly. Continue watching to find out what secrets Michael hid in that stuffed cat, and how a retired school principal became the most dangerous person these criminals had ever encountered. Make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your grandchild gave you such a terrifying warning? I pulled into the parking garage of the downtown shopping mall, choosing a spot on the 3rd level where we could observe anyone following us while remaining partially hidden behind concrete pillars. My hands were still trembling as I turned off the engine, but my mind was working with the sharp clarity that 35 years of handling crisis situations had trained into me. "Sarah," I said, turning to face her in the back seat, "I need you to show me what's special about Mr. Whiskers." She nodded solemnly and carefully turned the stuffed cat over, revealing a small, nearly invisible seam along its back that had been expertly sewn shut. With the concentration of a surgeon, she used her small fingernails to work the stitches loose, eventually creating an opening large enough to reveal what was hidden inside. My breath caught as she pulled out a small USB drive and a folded piece of paper. The paper was covered in Michael's precise handwriting, and as I unfolded it, I realized my quiet, methodical son had been living a double life that I never could have imagined. "Mom," the note began, "if you're reading this, it means they've made their move and we're all in immediate danger. I'm a federal informant working with the FBI to expose a massive corruption ring involving my company, Sterling Dynamics. For the past 6 months, I've been gathering evidence of defense contract fraud totaling over $200 million. I paused, my mind reeling. Sterling Dynamics was a prestigious government consulting firm where Michael had worked for 8 years. I had attended their holiday parties, met his colleagues, celebrated his promotions. The idea that it was a cover for massive fraud seemed impossible. The note continued, "The USB contains copies of all evidence I've gathered, including recordings of conversations with senior executives planning to sell classified military technology to foreign buyers. Sarah has memorized a phone number. She'll give it to you when you ask for Daddy's special friend. That person will know what to do with the evidence." My heart pounded as I looked at my granddaughter, who had been carrying this enormous burden with the solemn dignity of a child far older than her years. "Sarah," I said gently, "can you tell me about Daddy's special friend?" Without hesitation, she recited a phone number, her clear voice making each digit distinct. Then she added, "Daddy said to tell you her name is Agent Martinez, and she's been protecting us even when we didn't know it." Agent Martinez, a federal agent who had been protecting us without our knowledge. The implications sent another wave of fear and confusion through me. How long had Michael known we were in danger? How many other secrets had he been keeping to protect us? The sound of a car engine echoing through the parking garage made me freeze. Through the rearview mirror, I could see the black sedan that had followed us slowly ascending the ramp to our level. They had found us again, which meant our pursuers were either very skilled or had resources I couldn't begin to understand. "We need to move," I whispered to Sarah, quickly folding the note and slipping it into my purse along with the USB drive. "Remember our game from earlier? We're going to play it again." But as I started the engine, I realized we had a serious problem. The garage had only one exit, and our followers had positioned themselves to block it. We were trapped on the 3rd level of a parking structure with nowhere to run, and a 7-year-old child depending on me to keep her safe. That's when I remembered something from my years as a principal dealing with emergency situations. Sometimes the best escape isn't the obvious one. Sometimes you have to think like the people chasing you wouldn't expect you to think. "Sarah," I said, my voice gaining strength as a plan formed in my mind. "We're going to take a little walk through the mall, and then we're going to call Daddy's special friend from somewhere these bad men will never think to look for us." I helped her out of the car, and we walked quickly toward the mall entrance, moving like any grandmother and granddaughter on a shopping trip. But as we passed through the doors into the bustling crowd of afternoon shoppers, I caught sight of our reflection in a store window and realized something that chilled me to the bone. We looked exactly like what we were, two frightened people running for their lives, and in a world where my son had been secretly fighting a war I didn't even know existed, looking frightened was the same as painting a target on our backs. I needed to become someone else entirely, someone these criminals would never see coming, someone who could protect Sarah and deliver Michael's evidence to the right people before it was too late. The question was, did I have it in me to become that person? At 68 years old, was I capable of outmaneuvering professional criminals who had the resources to track us across the city? As I guided Sarah deeper into the mall, blending into the crowd while my mind raced with possibilities, I made a promise to myself and to my absent son. I was about to find out exactly what Margaret Chen was made of when everything she loved was at stake. The food court buzzed with the familiar chaos of lunchtime crowds, teenagers sharing fries, business people checking phones between bites, mothers corralling toddlers. Perfect cover for what I needed to do. I found a table positioned where I could watch all the entrances while Sarah colored quietly with crayons I'd bought from the dollar store. "Sweetheart," I said, pulling out my phone with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "It's time to call Daddy's special friend." Sarah looked up from her drawing and recited the number again, her young voice clear and certain. As I dialed, I caught sight of one of our pursuers near the main entrance, scanning the crowd methodically. We had perhaps 10 minutes before they systematically searched every store and restaurant. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Martinez, Agent Martinez," I said, keeping my voice low. "My name is Margaret Chen. I believe you know my son, Michael." The brief silence that followed spoke volumes. When she responded, her tone had shifted to something more urgent, more personal. "Mrs. Chen, where are you right now? Are you and Sarah safe? We're at Westfield Mall, but we're being followed. Sarah gave me the USB drive and the note. I have everything Michael wanted you to receive. Listen to me very carefully," Agent Martinez said, and I could hear the sound of rapid typing in the background. "The men following you work for a private security firm hired by Sterling Dynamics. They're not just after the evidence you're carrying. They've been ordered to eliminate all potential witnesses." The casual way she said, "eliminate," made my blood run cold. These weren't just corporate thugs trying to intimidate us. They were professional killers, and Sarah and I were their targets. "What do I do?" I asked, watching Sarah continue to color, blissfully unaware that we were discussing our potential murder. "There's a small electronics store on the second level called Tech Hub. The owner, David Kim, is one of our assets. Tell him Agent Rodriguez sent you, and he'll hide you until I can arrange extraction. But Mrs. Chen, you need to understand something crucial about your situation." "What?" Michael didn't just stumble onto evidence of fraud. He's been working undercover for us for 8 months, and what he discovered goes far beyond Sterling Dynamics. We're looking at a conspiracy involving defense contractors, foreign intelligence services, and at least 3 high-ranking Pentagon officials. The technology they're planning to sell would compromise every military operation we have in the Pacific. I felt the world tilt around me as the full scope of what Michael had been involved in became clear. My son wasn't just a corporate informant. He was a federal agent working on a case that could affect national security. And somehow, that made Sarah and me not just witnesses, but threats to people with the power to make us disappear without a trace. "How long has he been in danger?" I asked, the mother in me needing to understand how long my child had been living with this burden. "Since the day he contacted us. We've had surveillance on your house, your granddaughter's school, everywhere you might be vulnerable. But yesterday, something changed. Michael discovered they had identified him as our source, and he had less than 12 hours to get that evidence to us before they moved against him. That explained the sudden business trip, the careful instructions to Sarah, the way he had hugged us both just a little too tightly at the train station. He had known it might be the last time he saw us. "Is he safe?" I asked, dreading the answer. "He's in protective custody, but his safety depends entirely on whether we can get that evidence and put these people in prison before they can regroup. Mrs. Chen, you're not just carrying a USB drive. You're carrying the key to preventing classified military technology from falling into hostile hands." The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. At the same time, I felt something else, a fierce pride in my son for risking everything to do what was right, and a growing determination to make sure his sacrifice meant something. "I understand," I said, standing up and gathering Sarah's coloring supplies. "We're going to Tech Hub now." "Mrs. Chen," Agent Martinez added, her voice softening slightly, "I want you to know that Michael spoke about you constantly during our briefings. He said you were the strongest person he'd ever known, that you taught him the difference between what's legal and what's right. He was counting on that strength to keep Sarah safe." As I ended the call and took Sarah's hand, I realized that everything I had learned in 35 years of being an educator, every crisis I had navigated as a principal, every difficult parent conference and emergency situation I had handled, had been preparing me for this moment. These criminals thought they were hunting a frightened old woman and a child. What they were actually facing was someone who had spent decades protecting young people from threats they couldn't even see coming. Someone who understood that when children's lives were at stake, there were no rules that couldn't be broken. "Come on, darling," I said to Sarah, my voice steady with newfound purpose. "Let's go help your daddy save the country." Tech Hub occupied a narrow storefront wedged between a pretzel stand and a jewelry repair shop, its windows cluttered with the latest gadgets and computer accessories. To most shoppers, it would appear completely unremarkable. But as Sarah and I approached, I noticed details that suggested something more significant. Security cameras positioned at unusual angles, a reinforced door frame, and a subtle but sophisticated alarm system. David Kim looked up from behind the counter as we entered, his expression shifting from casual customer service to sharp alertness when I spoke the code phrase. "Agent Rodriguez sent us," I said quietly, noting how his hand moved instinctively toward something beneath the register. Without a word, he flipped the store sign to closed and ushered us through a door marked "Employees Only" into a back room that revealed the true nature of his operation. Multiple computer screens displayed what appeared to be surveillance feeds from around the mall. Sophisticated communication equipment lined the walls, and a large safe stood open, revealing stacks of documents and electronic devices. "Mrs. Chen," he said, his accent crisp and professional, "Agent Martinez briefed me on your situation. You're carrying something that a lot of very dangerous people want to get their hands on." I pulled out the USB drive, and his eyes widened slightly as he recognized its significance. "This contains the Sterling Dynamics files?" When I nodded, he immediately inserted it into a specialized computer that began running what appeared to be decryption software. "Sarah," I said, settling my granddaughter into a chair with a tablet loaded with educational games, "you're being so brave. Can you play quietly while the grown-ups talk about important things?" She nodded solemnly, already absorbed in the distraction I'd provided. But I noticed how she kept one ear tuned to our conversation, her young mind still processing the gravity of our situation, even while she pretended to focus on her game. "Mr. Kim," I began, but he held up a hand as data began scrolling across his screens. "David, please, and Mrs. Chen, what your son uncovered here is extraordinary." His fingers flew across the keyboard, opening file after file of evidence. "We suspected Sterling Dynamics was involved in defense contract irregularities, but this documents a systematic conspiracy involving at least 12 major defense contractors and foreign intelligence services from 3 different countries. The screens filled with financial records, recorded conversations, and email exchanges that painted a picture of corruption so vast it seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Companies winning contracts through bribery, military specifications being altered to benefit specific manufacturers, and most disturbing of all, classified technology being deliberately leaked to foreign buyers for massive profits. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, trying to grasp the scope of what Michael had uncovered. "Conservative estimate? $2.7 billion over the past 5 years. But Mrs. Chen, the money is actually the least concerning part of this. They've been selling guidance systems for missiles, encryption software for military communications, even blueprints for classified surveillance equipment." A chill ran through me as I realized the implications. That technology could be used against our own soldiers. "Already has been," David confirmed grimly. Michael identified at least 3 instances where American military operations were compromised because hostile forces had access to our classified systems. People died because of what these companies did for profit. The weight of that knowledge settled on me like a physical burden. My son hadn't just uncovered corporate fraud. He had exposed treason that had cost American lives and continued to threaten national security. With every day, these criminals remained free. There's something else, David continued, pulling up a series of email exchanges. Sterling Dynamics discovered Michael was investigating them approximately 6 weeks ago. They've been feeding him false information while planning to eliminate him and anyone who might have access to the real evidence. Eliminate, I repeated, the clinical term somehow more terrifying than if he had simply said kill. Professional assassination disguised as accidents or random crimes. They have a team of contractors who specialize in making problems disappear without leaving traceable connections back to the companies involved. I glanced at Sarah, still absorbed in her game, but undoubtedly absorbing every word we spoke. My granddaughter was living with the knowledge that people wanted to murder her family, and she was handling it with a composure that broke my heart and filled me with pride simultaneously. What happens now? I asked, watching as David continued to copy and analyze the evidence Michael had risked everything to gather. Agent Martinez is coordinating with multiple federal agencies. This evidence will trigger the largest defense contractor investigation in decades, potentially involving the FBI, CIA, Department of Defense, and Justice Department. But Mrs. Chen, the people you're dealing with have resources and connections at the highest levels of government and business. He turned to face me directly, his expression grave. Even with this evidence, it could take months or years to build prosecutable cases against all the involved parties. During that time, you and Sarah will remain targets. These people cannot afford to let you live as potential witnesses. The blunt assessment of our situation was both terrifying and oddly liberating. At least now I understood exactly what we were facing. This wasn't a situation where we could simply lay low until the immediate danger passed. This was a war that would continue until either these criminals were behind bars or we were dead. Then we make sure they go to prison first, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. David studied my face for a long moment, then smiled slightly. Agent Martinez said Michael described you as someone who never backed down from a fight when children were involved. I can see what he meant. As he prepared encrypted copies of the evidence for immediate transmission to federal authorities, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. I wasn't going to spend months or years running and hiding, looking over my shoulder, keeping Sarah in a state of constant fear. I was going to help them catch these. Basta David's encrypted transmission to Agent Martinez took less than 5 minutes, but those minutes felt like hours as we waited for confirmation that the evidence had reached federal authorities safely. Sarah had fallen asleep in her chair, emotionally exhausted from our morning of revelations and narrow escapes. I watched her peaceful face and felt my resolve harden into something that surprised me with its intensity. The secure phone rang, and David answered with practiced efficiency. After a brief conversation filled with technical jargon and coded references, he turned to me with an expression that mixed relief and apprehension. The evidence is now in the hands of a joint task force involving the FBI, Defense Intelligence Agency, and Department of Justice, he reported. Agent Martinez says they've been building parallel cases against several of the companies involved, but Michael's evidence provides the missing connections they needed to move forward with arrests. How soon? I asked, thinking of Michael somewhere in protective custody, probably wondering if Sarah and I were safe. Coordinated raids are planned for tomorrow morning. Sterling Dynamics, Peterson Defense Systems, Advanced Military Technologies, and at least 6 other companies will be hit simultaneously. But Mrs. Chen, there's something else you need to understand about what your son uncovered. He pulled up a new screen showing a complex web of connections between companies, government officials, and foreign entities. This conspiracy involves people with access to the highest levels of classified information. The technology they've been selling hasn't just compromised past operations. It's given hostile nations the ability to anticipate and counter our current military capabilities. I studied the diagram, my educator's mind working to process the implications. You're saying they've crippled our national defense for money. Worse than that, they've created a situation where American military superiority, which has maintained global stability for decades, is being systematically undermined from within. The countries buying this technology aren't just competitors. Some of them are actively hostile to American interests. The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. These weren't just greedy defense contractors padding their profits. They were traitors whose actions threatened the security of every American citizen and our allies around the world. There's one more thing, David continued, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. Agent Martinez asked me to tell you that Michael specifically requested you be kept informed of something we discovered in the deeper levels of Sterling Dynamics communications. He opened another file, this one containing email exchanges between Sterling executives and what appeared to be foreign intelligence contacts. 3 months ago, Sterling's leadership made a decision that anyone who threatened their operation would be eliminated, along with their immediate family members. Mrs. Chen, you and Sarah weren't just potential witnesses. You were marked for assassination the moment Michael started gathering evidence. The clinical way he delivered this information somehow made it more terrifying than if he had been dramatic about it. These people had been planning to murder my granddaughter for months, treating her life as nothing more than a business expense necessary to protect their profits. How many families have they killed? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We're not certain yet, but the investigation has identified at least 4 suspicious deaths over the past 2 years. Accidents, home invasions, medical emergencies that couldn't be traced back to Sterling but occurred immediately after potential whistleblowers emerged. I felt something cold and implacable settle in my chest. These weren't just criminals. They were monsters who killed children to protect their ability to betray their own country. And they had put Sarah on their list. What can I do to help ensure they're all caught? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. David studied my face for a moment before responding. Agent Martinez anticipated you might ask that question. She said Michael warned her that you had what he called an implacable sense of justice when children were threatened. He pulled out a secure tablet and handed it to me. There's one more piece of evidence we need to complete the case against the highest-level conspirators. Sterling Dynamics keeps their most sensitive communications on a private server located in their executive offices. The FBI needs someone to physically access that server and install monitoring software. Someone who wouldn't be suspected of being involved in a federal investigation, I said, understanding immediately what he was suggesting. A concerned citizen reporting suspicious activity. Someone with enough credibility and civic background that Sterling's security wouldn't view her as a threat. His expression was carefully neutral. Agent Martinez emphasized that this would be completely voluntary and extremely dangerous. I looked at Sarah, still sleeping peacefully despite everything she had endured today. These people had marked her for death before she had even learned to ride a bicycle. They had stolen her father from her and forced her to carry burdens no child should ever have to bear. What exactly would I need to do? I asked. David's respect for my decision was evident in his tone as he began outlining a plan that would either complete the case against Sterling Dynamics or get me killed in the attempt. But as I listened to the details, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. And an angry grandmother protecting her family was apparently one of the most dangerous forces these sophisticated criminals had ever encountered. They were about to discover that 68 years of life experience had taught me things that no amount of money or corporate power could overcome. Things about determination, about protecting what matters most, and about what happens when someone finally decides to fight back with nothing left to lose. The plan David outlined was both elegant and terrifying in its simplicity. Sterling Dynamics occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown office building, with their most sensitive servers housed in a secure room on the executive level. As a concerned citizen with an impeccable background, I would have legitimate reason to visit their offices to report suspicious activity I had witnessed. Your cover story is that you noticed unusual activity at their suburban storage facility, David explained, showing me photographs of the actual location. Late-night deliveries, foreign license plates, people arriving and leaving at odd hours. As a neighborhood watch coordinator, you felt obligated to report it to company security. It was brilliant because it was believable. My 35 years as a school principal had indeed made me the type of person who noticed and reported suspicious behavior. Sterling's security would have no reason to suspect that a retired educator was actually working with federal agents. The device you'll need to install is smaller than a thumb drive, he continued, showing me what appeared to be a piece of sophisticated electronics disguised as a paperclip. Once attached to their server, it will create a backdoor that allows the FBI to monitor all communications in real time. How do I get access to their secure server room? I asked, studying the building schematics he had pulled up on his screen. That's where your professional background becomes an advantage. Security systems in office buildings are designed to keep out criminals and terrorists, not concerned citizens with appointment books and legitimate business. You'll schedule a meeting with their community relations director to report your concerns about the storage facility. David pulled up personnel files showing Sterling's executive staff. Patricia Morrison, their community relations director, has an office on the 32nd floor, 2 doors down from the server room. During your meeting, you'll excuse yourself to use the restroom. The server room's electronic lock can be bypassed with this device. He handed me what looked like a standard hotel key card. Hold it against the lock for 3 seconds. The device will clone the access credentials from any employee badge that's been used on that door in the past 72 hours. I studied the simple plastic card, amazed that something so ordinary-looking could overcome sophisticated security systems. What if someone sees me? Executive floors in office buildings are surprisingly empty during the day. Most meetings happen in conference rooms on lower floors, but if you encounter someone, you're simply a confused visitor looking for the restroom. The plan's elegance lay in its psychological accuracy. I looked exactly like what I claimed to be, a concerned citizen doing her civic duty. No one would suspect that a 68-year-old retired school principal was actually conducting a covert operation for federal law enforcement. There's one more component to this mission, David added, his expression becoming more serious. Agent Martinez needs you to gather intelligence on Sterling's emergency protocols. If our raids tomorrow morning encounter resistance, or if key evidence is destroyed before we can secure it, the backup plan involves a more direct approach. He showed me building plans highlighting evacuation routes, communication systems, and security measures. During your visit, note everything you can about their physical security. How many guards, what type of surveillance equipment, which exits lead where. You're preparing for the possibility that you might need to storm the building, I realized. If Sterling's leadership realizes we're moving against them, they have the resources to destroy evidence, eliminate witnesses, or even flee the country. The servers you'll be accessing contain real-time communications. If they discover our investigation before the raids begin, we need to be ready for immediate action. As David continued explaining contingency plans and emergency procedures, I found myself thinking about Michael somewhere in protective custody, probably wondering if his mother and daughter were safe. He had risked everything to expose these criminals, trusting that someone else would be able to finish what he had started. Sarah stirred in her chair, opening sleepy eyes and looking around the room with the confusion of a child waking up in an unfamiliar place. "Grandma? Are we still helping Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, gathering her onto my lap. "We're making sure the bad people can't hurt anyone else." She nodded solemnly, then looked at David with the direct gaze that children use when sizing up adults. "Are you one of the good guys?" David's expression softened as he knelt to her level. "I'm someone who helps make sure people like your daddy can keep other families safe." "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "Grandma is really good at stopping bad people. She used to catch kids who were mean at school." The innocent observation carried more weight than Sarah realized. My decades of experience dealing with difficult teenagers, manipulative parents, and occasionally dangerous situations had indeed prepared me for this in ways I was only beginning to understand. "Mr. Kim," I said, decision crystallizing in my mind, "when do we begin? Your appointment with Patricia Morrison is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 in the morning. That gives you approximately 18 hours to prepare mentally and review all the materials we've discussed. 18 hours to transform from a frightened grandmother running for her life into a covert operative capable of infiltrating a criminal conspiracy." The timeline seemed impossible, yet as I looked at Sarah's trusting face, I realized I had no choice but to make it possible. These people had marked my granddaughter for death. Tomorrow, I was going to walk into their headquarters and plant the device that would help bring them to justice. Not because I was brave, but because when everything you love is threatened, you discover capabilities you never knew you possessed. The war against Sterling Dynamics was about to begin, And they had no idea that their most dangerous enemy was a retired school principal with an appointment book and 68 years of experience dealing with people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. That evening, David arranged for Sarah and me to stay in a safe house on the outskirts of the city, a modest suburban home that appeared completely ordinary from the outside but contained sophisticated security systems and communication equipment. As Sarah watched cartoons in the living room, I spread the sterling dynamics materials across the kitchen table and began the most intensive preparation of my life. The building schematics revealed a layout typical of modern corporate headquarters, but David had highlighted specific details that would be crucial for tomorrow's mission: emergency exits, security camera blind spots, elevator access codes, and most importantly, the precise location of the server room relative to Patricia Morrison's office. The timing will be critical, I murmured to myself, studying the floor plan for the dozenth time. 2 minutes maximum to access the room, install the device, and return to the meeting. My phone buzzed with a secure message from Agent Martinez. Mrs. Chen, tomorrow's raids will begin at exactly 11:30 a.m. Your device needs to be installed and transmitting by 11:15 to capture any emergency communications. No pressure, but the success of multiple federal investigations may depend on those 15 minutes. No pressure indeed. I had to successfully infiltrate a criminal organization, bypass their security systems, plant monitoring equipment, and escape detection, all while maintaining the facade of a concerned citizen reporting neighborhood watch observations. I spent the next hour practicing my cover story until I could deliver it with the natural conviction of someone who had actually witnessed suspicious activity. My background as an educator proved invaluable here. Decades of parent conferences had taught me how to present complex information clearly and persuasively. "Sarah," I called softly, "can you come help me with something?" She approached with the serious expression she had worn since our adventure began, Mr. Whiskers tucked securely under her arm. "Are you practicing for tomorrow?" "I am, and I need someone very smart to help me make sure I remember everything correctly." I knelt to her level. "Can you listen to my story and tell me if it sounds believable?" For the next 20 minutes, Sarah listened intently as I rehearsed my presentation about suspicious activity at Sterling's storage facility. Her questions were surprisingly insightful, helping me refine details that would make the story more convincing. "Grandma," she said when I finished, "you sound like when you used to practice for school board meetings. Daddy said you always won those because you prepared better than everyone else." The observation struck me with unexpected force. Michael had been watching me navigate bureaucratic challenges for years, learning lessons about preparation, persistence, and strategic thinking that he had apparently applied to his own dangerous work. Now, I was using those same skills to complete the mission he had started. Around 9 p.m., David arrived with additional equipment and final intelligence updates. "Sterling's security protocols changed today," he reported, his expression serious. "They've implemented new access restrictions and increased their guard presence. Something has made them nervous." "Do they know about the federal investigation?" I asked, feeling my confidence waver slightly. "We don't think so, but they're definitely aware that someone has been asking questions about their operations. Your visit tomorrow will need to appear completely routine, nothing that would trigger additional suspicion." He handed me an earpiece smaller than a hearing aid. "Emergency communication only. If something goes wrong, if you're discovered or detained, press the activation button twice and Agent Martinez's team will respond immediately." The weight of the tiny device in my palm drove home the reality of what I was attempting. Federal agents would be monitoring my infiltration of a criminal organization in real time, ready to launch a rescue operation if I was caught. "David," I said, meeting his eyes directly, "I need you to promise me something. If this goes wrong tomorrow, if I'm caught or worse, you'll make sure Sarah gets to her father safely." "Mrs. Chen," he replied with quiet certainty, "nothing is going to happen to you tomorrow. You have advantages these people can't anticipate. You look exactly like what you claim to be. You have a legitimate reason for being there, and most importantly, you have something they've never encountered before." "What's that?" "A grandmother who's decided to go to war. Agent Martinez says that's the most dangerous force in the universe." As David departed, and I tucked Sarah into bed with promises that tomorrow would bring us closer to reuniting with her father, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, I had been Margaret Chen, retired educator, whose greatest adventure was choosing between competing retirement community activities. Tonight, I was someone else entirely. Someone capable of infiltrating criminal organizations. Someone federal agents trusted with crucial missions. Someone who had decided that when children's lives were threatened, there were no limits to what she was willing to do. I spent the final hours before sleep reviewing every detail of tomorrow's plan, visualizing each step from entering Sterling's lobby to planting the monitoring device to walking out undetected. By the time I finally closed my eyes, I had rehearsed the operation so thoroughly that I could execute it in my sleep, which was fortunate, because when morning came, I would need every advantage I could get. Sterling Dynamics had no idea that their most careful security measures were about to be defeated by a concerned citizen with an appointment book and the determination of a grandmother protecting her family. Morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Sarah and I shared breakfast in the safe house kitchen while I mentally rehearsed every detail of the mission ahead. She seemed to sense the importance of the day, eating quietly while occasionally glancing at me with the worried expression of a child who understands more than adults realize. "Grandma," she said, as I helped her into her jacket, "are you scared about today?" I considered giving her a reassuring lie, then decided on honesty instead. "A little bit, sweetheart. But sometimes being scared just means you're about to do something very important." She nodded solemnly. "Daddy said brave people aren't the ones who aren't scared. They're the ones who do the right thing even when they are scared." The wisdom of my son's parenting struck me anew. Even in the midst of his dangerous double life, he had been teaching his daughter lessons about courage and moral responsibility that were now helping sustain us both through this crisis. David arrived promptly at 8:30, bringing final intelligence updates and a detailed map of downtown traffic patterns. "Sterling's building has increased security this morning," he reported. 2 additional guards in the lobby, and they're checking identification more carefully than usual. "Any indication they suspect federal involvement?" I asked, adjusting the small earpiece that would maintain my connection to Agent Martinez's team. "Nothing specific, but they're clearly on edge about something. Your timing needs to be perfect. In and out within 30 minutes, device installed and transmitting by 11:15. He handed me a professional-looking folder containing fabricated documentation of the suspicious activity I would be reporting. Photographs of Sterling's storage facility taken at various times, notes written in my own handwriting describing unusual deliveries and foreign license plates, even copies of emails I had supposedly sent to local police requesting guidance. "This is incredibly thorough," I observed, impressed by the attention to detail. "The best cover stories are the ones that could actually be true. If Sterling Security decides to verify your claims, everything in that folder will check out because we made it check out." As we prepared to leave for downtown, Sarah hugged me with the fierce intensity of a child who might be saying goodbye. "Bring Daddy home," she whispered against my ear. "I will," I promised, meaning it more deeply than any words I had ever spoken. The drive to Sterling's building passed in focused silence. David dropped me 3 blocks away, and I walked the remaining distance like any other senior citizen with a morning appointment. The October air was crisp and clear, the kind of day that normally would have filled me with simple pleasure at being alive and healthy enough to enjoy it. Instead, I found myself cataloging every detail of my surroundings: security cameras at building entrances, police patrol patterns, escape routes if something went wrong. My educator's mind, trained to notice everything happening in a crowded hallway, was now operating in an entirely different context. Sterling Dynamics occupied floors 30 through 32 of a gleaming glass tower that projected corporate success and respectability. As I approached the main entrance, I could see the additional security David had mentioned. Guards who appeared more alert than typical building security, their eyes scanning everyone who entered with professional assessment. I walked through the lobby doors at exactly 9:55, 5 minutes early for my 10 o'clock appointment with Patricia Morrison. Early enough to appear punctual and respectful, but not so early as to seem overeager or suspicious. "Good morning," I said to the reception desk, projecting the confident authority I had developed through decades of dealing with bureaucracy. "I have an appointment with Ms. Morrison in Community Relations, Margaret Chen." The receptionist checked her computer and issued me a visitor badge after examining my identification with the thoroughness David had warned me to expect. 32nd floor, suite 3208. The elevators are to your right. As I rode the elevator up, I reviewed the building layout one final time. Patricia Morrison's office, the server room, the restroom that would provide my excuse for leaving the meeting, the timing that would determine success or failure. The elevator doors opened onto a carpeted hallway lined with offices bearing nameplate indicating Sterling's senior executive staff. Vice presidents, directors, department heads, all the corporate titles that masked what I now knew was a criminal conspiracy reaching the highest levels of government and defense. Suite 3208 bore a simple nameplate: Patricia Morrison, Community Relations Director. I knocked and was invited to enter by a pleasant voice that belonged to a woman in her early 50s with graying blonde hair and the practiced smile of a professional communicator. "Mrs. Chen," she said, rising to shake my hand, "please have a seat. I understand you have some concerns about activity at one of our facilities." "Yes," I replied, settling into the chair across from her desk and opening my folder with the confidence of someone who had done her homework thoroughly. "I live near your storage facility on Maple Avenue, and I've noticed some unusual activity that I felt should be brought to your attention." As I began presenting my fabricated evidence of suspicious activity, I was simultaneously noting everything about the office layout, the building's security measures, and most importantly, the location of the server room just 2 doors down the hallway. Patricia Morrison listened with professional attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated Sterling took community concerns seriously. She had no idea she was speaking with a federal informant who was about to plant monitoring equipment that would help destroy her company. In 12 minutes, I would excuse myself to use the restroom. In 15 minutes, I would be installing a device that would give the FBI access to Sterling's most sensitive communications. In 18 minutes, I would either be walking out of this building as an unlikely hero or setting off alarms that would expose a federal investigation before it could reach completion. The trap was set. Now I just had to spring it without getting caught. 12 minutes into my meeting with Patricia Morrison, I delivered the line I had rehearsed dozens of times. "I'm sorry, but could you direct me to the restroom? I'm afraid I had too much coffee this morning." She smiled with practiced hospitality. "Of course, just down the hall to your right, past the conference room." I walked out of her office with the measured pace of someone with a simple biological need, but my heart was pounding so hard I was certain it must be audible. The hallway was empty except for the distant sound of keyboard typing from behind closed doors. Executive floors during mid-morning were exactly as David had predicted, largely deserted as most meetings occurred in conference rooms on lower levels. The server room door bore a simple placard: IT systems, authorized personnel only. I approached it casually, as if I had simply taken a wrong turn, then glanced quickly in both directions before pressing David's cloned access card against the electronic lock. 3 seconds, the longest 3 seconds of my life. Then a soft click indicated the lock had disengaged. I slipped inside and immediately understood why this room required such security. Banks of servers lined the walls, their indicator lights blinking in patterns that represented the digital heartbeat of Sterling's entire operation. Somewhere in this maze of technology were the communications that would expose the full scope of their criminal conspiracy. According to David's instructions, the primary communication server would be the largest unit with red indicator lights positioned at eye level near the center of the room. I located it quickly and removed the disguised paperclip device from my pocket, my hands surprisingly steady despite the magnitude of what I was attempting. The device attached magnetically to the server's access panel with a soft click that seemed incredibly loud in the silence of the room. Immediately, a tiny green light indicated it was active and transmitting. Somewhere across the city, FBI technicians were now monitoring every communication flowing through Sterling's most secure systems. I had done it. The device was installed and operational with 4 minutes to spare before the 11:15 deadline. All I had to do now was return to Patricia Morrison's office, complete our meeting, and walk out of the building as if nothing had happened. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, purposeful footsteps that stopped directly outside the server room door. I froze, my mind racing through possibilities. A security guard making rounds? A technician coming to check the systems? Or worse, someone who had observed my unauthorized entry. The door handle turned. I pressed myself against the side of the server bank, hoping the equipment would provide enough concealment to avoid immediate detection. The footsteps entered the room, accompanied by a man's voice, speaking into what sounded like a radio or phone. "Yeah, I'm checking the server room now." Morrison called down about her visitor asking detailed questions about our storage facilities. Something felt off to her. My blood turned to ice. Patricia Morrison had suspected something about my presentation and called security to investigate. My carefully crafted cover story had somehow triggered suspicion instead of allaying it. "No sign of tampering," the voice continued as the footsteps moved deeper into the room. "But I want to run a full diagnostic on all systems. If someone's been asking about our facilities, we need to make sure our communications are secure." I remained motionless behind the server bank, knowing that discovery meant not just personal danger, but the collapse of the entire federal investigation. If Sterling Security discovered the monitoring device before the raids began, they would have time to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. The footsteps approached my hiding place. In seconds, I would be discovered, and everything Michael had risked to expose would be lost. Sarah would remain a target. The criminals would escape justice, and American soldiers would continue dying because of compromised military technology. That's when 35 years of dealing with difficult teenagers provided an unexpected solution. I stood up and walked directly toward the security guard with the confident authority of someone who belonged exactly where she was. "Excuse me," I said in my most professional principal's voice. "I seem to have gotten turned around looking for the restroom. Could you point me in the right direction?" The guard, a middle-aged man who had been expecting to find an intruder, was completely unprepared for a polite grandmother asking for directions. His suspicious alertness shifted to embarrassed helpfulness. "Oh, ma'am, you're not supposed to be in here. This is a restricted area." "I'm so sorry," I replied with genuine-sounding mortification. "I was meeting with Ms. Morrison about some community concerns, and I'm afraid I got completely lost trying to find the ladies' room. These corporate buildings all look the same to me." His demeanor relaxed completely. I was exactly what I appeared to be, a confused senior citizen who had wandered into the wrong room. "No problem, ma'am. Happens all the time. The restroom is just back down the hall, past the elevators." "Thank you so much," I said, walking past him toward the door. "I feel so foolish. At my age, you'd think I'd have learned to ask for better directions." He chuckled as he escorted me out of the server room. "My mother does the same thing every time she visits my office. I'll walk you back to Ms. Morrison's office to make sure you don't get lost again." As we walked down the hallway together, the security guard chatting pleasantly about the confusing layout of modern office buildings, I realized I had just accomplished something that professional spies would have considered impossible. I had been caught red-handed in a restricted area during a covert operation and convinced my captor to escort me back to my appointment. Sometimes the best disguise isn't sophisticated technology or elaborate cover stories. Sometimes it's simply being exactly who you are. A grandmother who looks harmless because she is harmless, right up until the moment she decides to go to war. I returned to Patricia Morrison's office with the security guard's cheerful assistance, settling back into my chair as if the most dangerous 10 minutes of my life had been nothing more than an embarrassing wrong turn. Patricia looked up from her notes with professional concern. "I hope you found everything you needed, Mrs. Chen. Sometimes these older buildings can be a bit confusing to navigate." "Oh yes, thank you. And thank you to this gentleman for helping me find my way back." I smiled at the security guard, who nodded pleasantly before departing to continue his rounds, completely unaware that he had just escorted a federal informant away from successfully completing her mission. As Patricia and I resumed our discussion about suspicious activity at Sterling's storage facility, my earpiece crackled almost inaudibly with Agent Martinez's voice. "Device is active and transmitting. Outstanding work, Mrs. Chen. Maintain your position until exactly 11:25, then conclude your meeting naturally. 11:25. That would give the monitoring device 10 minutes to capture communications before the federal raids began at 11:30. 10 minutes for Sterling's executives to potentially discover they had been compromised, to begin destroying evidence, or to realize that the concerned citizen sitting in their community relations office was actually the source of their downfall. Mrs. Chen, Patricia was saying, I want to assure you that Sterling Dynamics takes community concerns very seriously. The activity you've documented at our Maple Avenue facility does seem unusual, and we'll definitely investigate your observations. I appreciate that so much, I replied, maintaining the persona of a relieved neighbor while monitoring the time on the wall clock behind her desk. 11:17, 8 minutes until the raids began. I wasn't sure who to contact about these concerns, but I felt I had a civic duty to report what I'd observed. You absolutely did the right thing. Corporate citizenship is a responsibility we all share. Patricia's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with a slight frown. I'm sorry, would you excuse me for just a moment? This appears to be urgent. She answered the call with crisp professionalism. Morrison? Yes, I'm aware of the security check. No, everything seems perfectly normal here. Mrs. Chen is a longtime community resident reporting neighborhood concerns. What do you mean, verify her background? My blood began to chill as I realized Patricia was speaking with someone about me specifically. The security guard who had found me in the server room must have reported our encounter, triggering additional scrutiny of my presence in the building. I see, Patricia continued, her tone becoming more cautious as she glanced at me. Yes, I'll keep her here until you can complete your verification. She ended the call and turned back to me with a smile that no longer reached her eyes. Mrs. Chen, would you mind waiting here for just a few more minutes? Our security department wants to verify some details about the concerns you've raised. The polite words carried an unmistakable undertone. I was being detained. Whatever verification they were conducting, it would reveal that my story about the Maple Avenue facility, while perfectly documented, was fabricated. More importantly, it would give them time to examine their servers more carefully and potentially discover the monitoring device. Of course, I replied, with the patience of someone who had nothing to hide. I understand you need to be thorough about these matters, but internally, my mind was racing. 11:18, 12 minutes until the federal raids. If Sterling's security discovered the monitoring device before then, they could alert their co-conspirators, destroy evidence, or even evacuate key personnel. The entire investigation that Michael had risked his life to make possible could collapse because I had been detained for verification procedures. Patricia made another phone call, this one clearly to Sterling's IT department. Yes, I need you to run a comprehensive diagnostic on our server systems. Someone was found in the server room earlier, and although it appears to have been an innocent mistake, we need to verify that nothing was compromised. I forced myself to remain calm, but I could feel sweat forming despite the air conditioning. In a matter of minutes, IT technicians would discover the monitoring device. When they did, they would realize that Sterling had been infiltrated by federal agents, and my position as the only outsider in the building would make me the obvious suspect. 11:20, 10 minutes until the raids. My earpiece crackled again, so softly only I could hear. Mrs. Chen, we're detecting increased activity on Sterling's internal networks. It appears they're beginning to suspect surveillance. Can you maintain your position for 7 more minutes? 7 more minutes. 7 minutes to sit calmly while Sterling's security closed in on discovering both the monitoring device and my true purpose for being there. 7 minutes to maintain the facade of a concerned citizen while federal agents prepared to storm the building. Mrs. Chen, Patricia said, consulting her computer screen. I'm having some difficulty verifying the registration information for your address on Maple Avenue. Could you provide additional identification or perhaps a utility bill that would confirm your residence? It was a trap. They were testing whether my cover story would hold up under scrutiny. The address I had given was real, but it belonged to a safe house that wouldn't appear in standard residential databases. Any attempt to verify my claimed residence would reveal inconsistencies that would expose me as a federal operative. I'm afraid I don't carry utility bills with me, I replied, with the mild confusion of someone facing an unreasonable request. Is there some problem with the concerns I've reported? I was simply trying to be a good neighbor. Before Patricia could respond, her phone rang again. This time, the conversation was brief and clearly alarming. She ended the call and looked at me with undisguised suspicion. Mrs. Chen, Our IT department has discovered unauthorized monitoring equipment in our server room. Equipment that was installed within the past hour, during the exact time period when you were found in that same room by our security guard. The moment of revelation had arrived. There was no longer any possibility of maintaining my cover story or walking out of this building undetected. Patricia Morrison was no longer speaking to a concerned citizen. She was confronting a federal informant who had just completed a surveillance operation against her company. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was simply looking for the restroom and got confused by the building layout. "Mrs. Chen," Patricia replied, her voice now carrying the cold authority of someone who had uncovered a deception. "I'm going to need you to remain here while our security team conducts a more thorough investigation of your presence in our building today." 11:22. 8 minutes until the raids. I was trapped in a corporate office with people who now suspected I was working with federal law enforcement. Worse, they had discovered the monitoring device, which meant they knew their communications were being intercepted. My earpiece crackled once more. "Mrs. Chen, Sterling is implementing emergency protocols. They're beginning to destroy sensitive documents and attempting to contact external associates. We need to move up our timeline. Federal teams are entering the building now." The raids were beginning 6 minutes early because my cover had been blown. Somewhere in this building, FBI agents were moving through hallways and stairwells, racing to secure evidence before Sterling could destroy it. And I was sitting in the community relations office of a criminal conspiracy, about to discover whether a 68-year-old retired school principal could survive a confrontation with corporate killers who had already murdered multiple families to protect their secrets. The war between Margaret Chen and Sterling Dynamics was about to reach its climax, and I had no idea whether my decades of experience dealing with difficult people would be enough to keep me alive for the next 8 minutes. The door to Patricia Morrison's office burst open with explosive force as 2 men in tactical gear entered, weapons drawn. But instead of Sterling's security, I heard the most beautiful words in the English language. "FBI, everyone on the ground, now!" Patricia's face went ashen as she realized the federal raids had begun and that her captive was exactly who she had suspected, a federal informant who had successfully infiltrated their organization. The careful corporate facade crumbled instantly, replaced by the desperate calculation of a criminal facing imprisonment. "Agent Rodriguez, FBI," the lead agent announced, his weapon trained on Patricia while his partner secured the room. "Margaret Chen, are you injured?" "I'm perfectly fine," I replied, standing slowly with my hands visible as more agents flooded into the office. "The monitoring device is installed and operational. They discovered it about 3 minutes ago and began implementing emergency protocols." Through the office windows, I could see the coordinated chaos of a massive federal operation. Black SUVs surrounded the building. Agents moved through hallways with military precision, and Sterling employees were being escorted from the building in handcuffs. The conspiracy that had threatened my family and killed American soldiers was finally being dismantled by the full force of federal law enforcement. "Mrs. Chen," Agent Rodriguez said, his tone mixing professional respect with genuine admiration. "Agent Martinez wants you to know that your device captured communications between Sterling executives and their contacts in 3 foreign intelligence services. They were attempting to destroy evidence and flee the country when we moved in." Patricia Morrison had remained silent during this exchange, but I could see her mind working frantically. As a senior executive in the conspiracy, she knew exactly how much evidence Sterling had accumulated and how many years in federal prison awaited everyone involved. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the defeated tone of someone whose world had just collapsed. "You have no idea what you've done," she said, looking directly at me with undisguised hatred. "The people you're interfering with have resources and connections that extend far beyond Sterling Dynamics. This doesn't end with a few arrests." "You're absolutely right," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "This doesn't end here, because what I've learned in the past 48 hours is that there are good people throughout our government and military who will never stop fighting criminals like you. You made one critical mistake when you decided to threaten children." Agent Rodriguez stepped forward. "Patricia Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit treason, violation of the Espionage Act, conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and approximately 37 other federal charges that will be detailed in your indictment. As they led Patricia away in handcuffs, she turned back toward me one final time. This won't protect your family forever. There are others who won't forget what you've done here. Let them come, I said with a certainty that surprised even me. They'll discover that threatening a grandmother was the worst mistake they ever made. The next hour passed in a blur of debriefings, evidence collection, and coordinated arrests throughout the Sterling building. Agent Martinez arrived personally to oversee the operation, greeting me with the professional warmth of someone who had coordinated dangerous missions with unexpected allies. "Mrs. Chen," she said, "what you accomplished today will result in the largest defense contractor prosecution in American history. The communications your device captured included real-time coordination with foreign intelligence services, plans to eliminate additional witnesses, and evidence of ongoing operations that would have compromised military security for decades. What about the other companies involved in the conspiracy?" I asked, thinking of the web of corruption David had shown me. "Simultaneous raids are occurring at Peterson Defense Systems, Advanced Military Technologies, and 9 other companies across 4 states. Your son's evidence and the intelligence we gathered from your device today will result in hundreds of arrests and the complete dismantling of this network." As we spoke, I watched through the office windows as Sterling executives were perp-walked through the lobby in handcuffs, their faces displaying the shock of people who had believed themselves untouchable. Chief Executive Officer James Sterling himself was led past the windows, his expensive suit and confident demeanor replaced by the orange jumpsuit and defeated posture of a federal prisoner. "Mrs. Chen," Agent Martinez continued, "there's someone who's been waiting to see you." She gestured toward the hallway, where a familiar figure appeared. My son Michael, looking tired and worried, but unmistakably alive and safe. Behind him, David Kim carried a sleepy Sarah, who had apparently been brought to witness the conclusion of our dangerous adventure. "Mom," Michael said, his voice breaking slightly as he embraced me. "Agent Martinez told me what you did. I never should have put you and Sarah in danger, but I'm so grateful that you were strong enough to finish what I started." "You didn't put us in danger," I replied firmly. "These criminals put us in danger the moment they decided to profit from American deaths. You just gave us the tools to fight back." Sarah, now fully awake, looked around at the controlled chaos of the federal operation with the wide eyes of a child processing extraordinary events. "Grandma," she said seriously, "did we win our game?" "We won, sweetheart," I confirmed, pulling her into my arms. "The bad people are going to prison, and your daddy is safe." "And we helped save the country?" she asked, remembering my promise from the electronics store. "We helped save the country," I agreed. Agent Martinez approached with final paperwork and security arrangements. "The immediate threat to your family has been eliminated with today's arrests, but we'll maintain protective surveillance for several weeks while we complete our investigation of Sterling's international connections." "What happens to people like Patricia Morrison?" I asked, thinking of her parting threat. "Federal sentences for treason start at 25 years and go up from there. The evidence we've gathered will ensure that everyone involved in this conspiracy spends the rest of their lives in federal prison. The foreign intelligence services that were purchasing American military technology will find their operations completely compromised, and the military equipment they thought they were buying will suddenly become useless as we modify our systems to counter their knowledge." As we prepared to leave the Sterling building, I reflected on the extraordinary 48 hours that had transformed my life completely. I had discovered capabilities I never knew I possessed, faced dangers I never could have imagined, and helped expose a conspiracy that threatened the security of every American family. But more than that, I had learned something profound about the nature of courage and justice. When everything you love is threatened, when children's lives hang in the balance, ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things. A retired school principal can become a federal operative. A concerned grandmother can declare war on corporate criminals and win. The elevator descended toward the lobby, carrying my family away from Sterling Dynamics forever. Through the windows, I could see news crews gathering to report on the largest defense contractor scandal in decades. Tomorrow, the world would learn about the conspiracy that had been exposed by a whistleblower and his unlikely allies. They would never know that the most critical intelligence had been gathered by a 68-year-old woman with an appointment book and the determination of a grandmother protecting her family. They would never know that the monitoring device that captured the final evidence had been installed by someone who looked exactly like what she was, a harmless senior citizen, right up until the moment she decided to go to war. As we reached the lobby and walked toward our new lives, Sarah looked up at me with the solemn expression she had worn throughout our adventure. "Grandma," she said, "if bad people ever threaten our family again, will you protect us?" "Always," I promised, meaning it more deeply than any words I had ever spoken. That's what grandmothers do. The war against Sterling Dynamics was over. Justice had been served, and Margaret Chen had discovered that sometimes the most powerful weapon against sophisticated criminals is simply an ordinary person who refuses to be intimidated when protecting the people she loves. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home in a quiet suburb outside Washington, D.C., watching Sarah help her father prepare breakfast while morning sunlight streamed through windows that no longer needed reinforced security glass. The Federal Witness Protection Program had provided us with new identities and a fresh start, but more importantly, it had given us something we had lost the moment this nightmare began: the simple pleasure of ordinary family moments. The trials had concluded just 2 weeks earlier with convictions that made headlines around the world. James Sterling, former CEO of Sterling Dynamics, had been sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Patricia Morrison received 65 years for her role in the conspiracy. In total, 143 individuals across 12 companies and 6 government agencies had been convicted of crimes ranging from treason to conspiracy to commit murder. The sentences totaled over 2,000 years in federal prison. But the numbers, impressive as they were, couldn't capture the full scope of what we had accomplished. The military technology that had been compromised was completely redesigned, making the stolen information useless to hostile foreign governments. The weapon systems that criminals had sold to enemies of America were rendered obsolete overnight. Most importantly, the systematic corruption that had threatened our national security for decades had been exposed and eliminated. Michael had returned to work for the federal government, this time openly as a senior investigator with the Department of Defense's new anti-corruption task force. His experience infiltrating Sterling Dynamics had made him one of the nation's leading experts on defense contractor fraud, and he was now responsible for ensuring that what happened to our family could never happen to another American family again. Sarah had adapted to our new life with the remarkable resilience of childhood. She attended a local elementary school where she was known simply as Sarah Mitchell, a bright 7-year-old whose biggest concern was whether she would make the soccer team next season. Her teacher had no idea that the quiet girl in the 3rd row had once carried federal evidence in her stuffed cat, or that her grandmother had infiltrated a criminal conspiracy to protect her. As for me, Margaret Chen had officially died in a carefully staged car accident 6 months ago. Margaret Mitchell, the identity I now carried, was a recent widow who had moved to the area to be closer to her son and granddaughter. On paper, I was exactly what I appeared to be, a retired educator enjoying the peaceful rhythm of life with family. But the woman I had become was someone entirely different from either Margaret Chen or Margaret Mitchell. The woman I had become had stared down corporate assassins and won. She had infiltrated a criminal conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and business. She had declared war on people who threatened children and emerged victorious. The phone rang, interrupting my morning reflections. Agent Martinez's voice carried its familiar tone of professional warmth mixed with genuine respect. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, using my new identity, even though we both knew exactly who I really was, "I wanted to give you an update on the final investigations. The international connections we traced through Sterling's communications have resulted in criminal prosecutions in 7 countries. The weapons technology that was sold to hostile governments has been completely neutralized through the redesign programs your son's evidence made possible." "Any ongoing threats to our family?" I asked, the question that still surfaced despite months of security briefings confirming our safety. "None whatsoever. The last of Sterling's international associates was arrested in Switzerland yesterday. The criminal network that threatened your family has been completely dismantled, and frankly, word has spread through certain circles about what happened to people who made the mistake of threatening Margaret Chen's family. I smiled at the implication. Somewhere in the dark corners of corporate crime and international espionage, people were telling stories about the grandmother who had brought down a conspiracy. Those stories, I hoped, would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider threatening innocent families for profit. After ending the call, I returned to watching my son and granddaughter navigate the simple complexities of weekday morning routines. Michael was explaining to Sarah why she needed to eat breakfast before watching cartoons, a conversation that carried the blessed normalcy of ordinary parenting challenges. No encoded messages hidden in stuffed animals, no monitoring devices disguised as paper clips, no federal agents coordinating surveillance operations. Just a father and daughter negotiating the terms of Saturday morning television privileges. "Grandma," Sarah called from the breakfast table, "can you tell me again about how we helped catch the bad people?" It had become her favorite story, requested with the frequency that other children demanded fairy tales or adventure books. But unlike fictional stories, this one carried the weight of lived experience and the satisfaction of justice accomplished. "Well," I began, settling into the chair beside her, "it started when a very brave little girl told her grandmother that they needed to leave the train station immediately because she had noticed something wasn't right. And I had Daddy's secret message in Mr. Whiskers," she added, her eyes bright with the pride of someone who had played a crucial role in saving the country. "That's right. And what did we learn about being brave? That brave people aren't the ones who aren't scared," she recited with 7-year-old solemnity. "They're the ones who do the right thing even when they are scared." Michael looked up from the stove where he was preparing scrambled eggs, his expression carrying the quiet gratitude of someone whose family had survived an impossible situation. "And what did we learn about grandmothers?" he added with a slight smile. "That they're really, really good at stopping bad people when they threaten kids," Sarah announced confidently. The simple exchange captured something profound about how our ordeal had changed not just our circumstances, but our understanding of what ordinary people are capable of when extraordinary situations demand it. I had spent 68 years thinking of myself as someone whose greatest adventures existed in books and whose most challenging confrontations involved difficult parent conferences or budget meetings with school boards. The woman I had discovered myself to be was someone entirely different, someone who could look at armed criminals and see not threats to be feared, but problems to be solved. Someone who could walk into enemy headquarters and plant surveillance equipment with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. Someone who could stare down corporate executives and federal agents with equal composure. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that courage isn't something you either possess or lack. Courage is something you choose, moment by moment, when people you love need protection and when doing the right thing requires more than you think you have to give. The doorbell rang, and through the window I could see David Kim approaching with a large gift bag and the smile of someone bearing good news. He had become a regular visitor to our new home, partly because his technical expertise continued to be valuable to ongoing federal investigations, but mostly because he had become genuinely fond of our unlikely family of reformed fugitives. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said as I opened the door, "I brought something I thought Sarah might enjoy." The gift bag contained a new stuffed animal, a small elephant with extraordinarily detailed stitching and careful craftsmanship. Sarah examined it with the thoroughness of someone who had learned to look for hidden compartments in innocent toys. "Does this one have secret messages too?" she asked hopefully. "No secret messages," David assured her with a laugh. "This one is just for being a very brave little girl who helped save her country." As Sarah hugged her new elephant and returned to the breakfast table, David pulled me aside with the expression of someone who had been waiting for an opportunity to speak privately. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said quietly, "I wanted you to know that what you accomplished has become something of a legend within federal law enforcement. Agent Martinez says that when they train new operatives now, they use your infiltration of sterling dynamics as a case study in how ordinary citizens can accomplish extraordinary things when they're properly motivated." "I hope they emphasize that motivation was protecting my family," I replied. "I wasn't trying to become some kind of hero. I was just trying to keep Sarah safe." That's exactly what makes it so remarkable, David observed. Professional operatives train for years to develop the skills you demonstrated naturally, but they can't train for the kind of determination that comes from protecting people you love. That's something you either have or you don't. As David departed and our Saturday morning settled into its peaceful rhythm, I found myself thinking about the other families whose lives had been saved by the dismantling of Sterling's conspiracy. Soldiers who would return home safely because compromised military technology had been redesigned. Defense contractors who would now operate under scrutiny that prevented the kind of systematic corruption we had exposed. Children who would grow up in a world where people like James Sterling and Patricia Morrison were behind bars instead of profiting from American deaths. The ripple effects of our 48-hour ordeal would continue for decades, protecting people who would never know that their safety had been purchased by a grandmother who refused to be intimidated when her family was threatened. That afternoon, as I tucked Sarah in for her nap, she looked up at me with the serious expression that had become familiar during our adventure. "Grandma," she said, "if bad people ever threaten our family again, will you protect us?" "Always," I promised, just as I had promised in the Sterling building 6 months earlier. That's what grandmothers do. But as I said the words, I realized they carried a different weight now. 6 months ago, I had made that promise based on hope and determination. Today, I made it based on proven capability and hard-earned knowledge of exactly what I was capable of when everything I loved was at stake. Margaret Chen had been a retired school principal who read mystery novels and volunteered at community events. Margaret Mitchell was someone entirely different, a woman who had declared war on a criminal conspiracy and emerged victorious, someone who had discovered that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they decide that some fights are worth whatever it takes to win. The woman I had become was someone I never could have imagined being, but someone I was proud to have discovered within myself. Someone who proved that the most dangerous enemies of sophisticated criminals aren't always professional agents or military operatives. Sometimes they're just grandmothers who have decided that threatening children was the worst mistake anyone could ever make.